So in the sermon this past weekend, we were in the 26th chapter. This is the 20th message. We got about 14 to go. And we came to this long section on curtains, the biggest topic in the entire Pentateuch, all 5 books that Moses wrote, is about building the tabernacle. And in this particular section, chapter 26, it's so much about curtains. And I just noted that in a world full of, war and debt and cancer and all these things, people show up in church looking for a little hope, a little inspiration, a little transcendence, and we have this long chapter on curtains. Why in the world does God care about curtains? So we looked at just the first handful of verses, and then I dropped down towards the end, and I said, there's a number of things that impressed me about this passage. First of all, the very fact that God, who can create the world in 6 days, spends 40 days coaching Moses on how to build his tabernacle suggests that he's very concerned not about the tabernacle, but about the work and the building of the building. And I just talked about the fact that work is a get to, it's not a have to. Yes, it's cursed, it's harder than it needs to be, but work is something that we were created to do and get to do. I talked about how the tabernacle foreshadows Jesus in the incarnation. And as a matter of fact, John 1:14 says that that the Word became flesh and dwelt or tabernacled among us. So the tabernacle is pointing to Jesus, and it points to him in another way, that God shows up on earth. That's what Jesus does. I noted the humility of the incarnation, both the tabernacle and of Jesus. I then also talked about the importance of worship, that God really cares that we rightly order our heart and rightly order worship, because not for his sake, but for ours, right? I quoted that C.S. Lewis quote about that God doesn't need our worship any more than C.S. Lewis said, I need a dog to bark approval at my books. And then finally I said, look, part of the reason to set up the curtain and make such a big deal about this veil that separates the holy place from the most holy place, this 4-inch thick, 15 feet high curtain, is because when Christ is crucified, it gets ripped in half. And so I read out of Matthew chapter 27 and then also read out of Hebrews chapter 10. Very rich theological passage, much to discuss. Have a good study.